The RS command and RS format options are actually part of a larger set of report server command options that you can use with the URL. These options let you issue commands to the server that let you interact with the report server catalog, such as to view its contents. There are other server command options, but command and format are definitely the most useful. And in particular, command has several options. List children lists the child items of a parent, most commonly the reports within a folder. Render, as you'd expect, renders a report. The Get Shared Dataset definition shows the XML definition of a shared dataset. Get Data Source Contents shows the properties of a data source defined on the server. Get Resource Contents renders a file as opposed to a report in an HTML page. And the Get Component definition displays the RDL for a report, the report definition language. As usual, all of these command options require that you have the proper permissions to access the specified object in the way that you're executing the command for. Let's take a look at a few ways of using report server commands. So here's an example of a URL that's going to list the reports in the sample reports folder. So I'm using the RS command and specifying list children, and that's going to operate on the object here. And there you can see I have a list of all of the reports within that folder. Pretty easy. And then here's a URL that displays the definition of this sales by year category subcategory, this data set, and displays it as XML. So I'll click on that, and the nice thing about Internet Explorer, like most browsers these days, it'll just display the XML. The nice thing about this is you can see the select statement that is used to access that data. So if you're trying to debug a report, maybe you don't have access to the report definition file, the RDL file, then you can use this option in order to see this information. But again, only if you have the proper permissions. And then this final example shows the properties of the AdventureWorks LT 2012 data source as XML. So again, I'm referencing this folder, data sources, specifically this data source. And then it's going to get the data source contents, which is going to operate on that data source. And there's the properties of it. Okay, so these are some pretty simple examples, but they show you just how much you can do using the server commands when you carefully craft reporting services URLs. Just keep in mind that whatever you can do in an exposed URL that a user can execute, users can do that same thing. But at least it's not a way to do an end run around security. Another thing you can do with a customized URL is that you can use query string parameters to control the appearance of the HTML viewer in Report Manager when you're rendering a report as HTML. For example, if you supply values for all of the required report parameters in the URL and don't want to let the user change those values, then you could set the RC parameters option to false. If you don't want to display the HTML viewer at all, you could set the RC toolbar option to false. So there's several useful options that you can use when customizing the HTML viewer. The first is doc map. You can set this to true or false. True is the default, but if you set it to false, it'll hide the document map of the report if the report has one. I mentioned parameters, true or false, true by default. If you set it to false, the user isn't going to be able to change the parameter values. The section is interesting. You can use this to display a specific page of the report. Toolbar, you can set this to false and hide the HTML viewer toolbar entirely, which includes the parameters pane. And then the last useful option is zoom. And what this does is it increases or decreases the report size by the percentages that you specify. Or you can fit the report into the available space using either page width or whole page. Literally, you set the zoom option to one of those two values. Here's an example of a URL that customizes the HTML viewer. In this case, it renders the reseller cumulative sales report without any toolbar at all, or the document map that normally shows with this report. And it jumps to the 143rd page. It's a pretty long report. So I'll go ahead and click on that. And now you can see that I don't have the HTML viewer at all. Now, when we've looked at this report in other parts of the course, you may remember that North America was the third continent included in the report. So we've jumped down 143 pages, past Europe, past all of the other options for the report. Okay, one downside of this is that because there's no toolbar, it's not really all that easy for the user to navigate around the report. So I can scroll down, all I'm getting is the single page, which may be what you need to do. But just keep in mind that the user can come up here to the toolbar, and if they really want to see the first page, can change that to just one, and now they can see the entire page. And it starts out with Europe. But again, that technique is useful for showing the user a specific part of the report. So maybe your application that is generating this URL has indexes into interesting information in the report, and the user can click on the link to get more detail about a specific piece of information. So if I go back, so maybe specifically about North America, United States, and the warehouse business type, and looking at those specific products. Another interesting thing that you can do with a customized URL with certain options on that URL is to modify the rendering behavior of the different export formats. All of the export render formats have additional options called device information settings that you can use to change this rendering behavior. It's not really a replacement for good report design, but in some cases you can fix minor rendering issues or make major changes to it. You specify this additional information by including the settings in the query string using this syntax. So this is additional query strings on the end of your URL. And RC is a fixed namespace prefix. So you can specify a particular tag equals a value, different setting for that value, and concatenate on as many as you want to use. Now I'm not going to go into detail about all of the many options available. There are several different rendering formats, and each of them, some of them in fact, have many different options. But you can find the complete list of the device information settings for each of the rendered formats by searching books online for the topic called Device Information Settings for Rendering Extensions. That topic has links to detailed device information settings for all of the rendering formats supported by reporting services, plus a couple other more esoteric devices. Okay, so for example, a few of the device information settings for the PDF renderer let you set the margins of a report in PDF format using margin top, margin bottom, margin left, and margin right. And as you'd expect, these modifies the size of the specified margin using a setting of inches. For each value, you have to specify an integer or decimal value followed by the string in for inches, in order to specify inches. The renderer then overrides the report's setting for that margin by the value you specify in the URL for the purpose of outputting it to your selected export format. Pretty cool technique. Here's an example of a URL where I'm modifying the device information settings for the PDF output format. The issue here is that the product sales ad hoc report, when you supply the parameters and output it to the PDF format, is too wide to fit on a single page. So each page of this report ends up taking 2 pages because the rightmost columns are cut off and appear on the following page. Not good. Now, a real solution to the problem is to go in and change the report definition to be more amenable to export as PDF. But if we can't do that, we might be able to change the device information settings for that format in order to accommodate the report. And that's exactly what I do here. Okay, so I'm outputting this report, specifying the report parameter values. I'm going to output it as a PDF, and then I'm setting the top margin to 1/2 inch, the bottom margin to 1/2 inch, and notice that I have a decimal value followed by IN, margin left setting to 0.3 inches, and margin right to 0.3 inches. Okay, so I'll go ahead and click on that and open it up in my PDF viewer. And as you can see, each of these pages now contains the full width of the table. Okay, so we've solved the problem. Again, it's really not a great way to overcome poor report design, but if you don't have control over the report, then this is a way to adapt the report to the export format. And you can do it through a URL. Now, there are several other device information settings that you can use with the PDF format. But unfortunately, and oddly, there isn't one to let you change the page orientation. Changing that at rendering, it probably would affect report design too much to be reliable. But it's certainly something to wish for in a future version of reporting services. Okay, I'll close that. Now, another option is that you can customize the CSV data rendering. The CSV render format includes a number of device information settings that are useful when you want to carefully control the format of the exported report data. By default, the CSV renderer outputs data using a comma as the field delimiter, a quotation mark as the qualifier around bits of data, essentially each field within a row, and a carriage return line feed as the record delimiter, with a header row and in CSV format suited for Microsoft Excel by default, which unfortunately plays a bit fast and loose with standard CSV. But if you wanted to change the output format, there are a number of options that you can use. For example, you could set the format to adhere to the CSV specification instead of being Excel friendly. And in that case, you set the Excel mode to false, as I do right there. And then you can change the field delimiter. In this case, I wanted to change it to use the vertical bar, and that's been encoded as that character right there. And then I want to use an apostrophe as the string qualifier, and so I'm setting the qualifier to a single apostrophe. Now, all of these properties need to use the RC namespace prefix. And so, within this URL, I can click on it and output a changed format to the CSV. Okay, I'm going to save this to my junk folder. And there's my products by category. So I'll open this up in Notepad. And here's where you can really see the change. And so I have the vertical bars that delimit the fields, both in the header row and in the detail row. The field qualifier is an apostrophe. And automatically the renderer then double ups on any embedded apostrophes. Okay, so I've made changes to that report format. So now you can customize the CSV data in order to make it usable in whatever destination application you want to use it with.